Chapter 16. Dead Souls Without Testaments. Political Cynicisms 3. Looking after war graves in the empty interior. Quoting Hermann Broch, Die Schlafwandler, from 1931 to 32. You know, sister, I am completely sober, but it is my deepest conviction. No one will ever really come home anymore. Quoting E.M. Remarks, All Quiet on the Western Front, 1928. How senseless is everything that was ever written, done, and thought if such a thing is possible. Everything must be disingenuous and inconsequential if the culture of millennia could not even hinder the streams of blood from being set flowing. In the survivors of the First World War, its dead did not come to rest. A change in the quality of dying had impinged on their consciousness. The Western Front of 1916 alone, in whose middle was the ghostly fort of Verdun, claimed over 1 million dead. For the first time in human history, a state of affairs was realised that can be designed by an expression from present-day American nuclear strategy. Megadeaths, equal to 1 million dead. With the tactics of artillery and trench warfare, death on the battlefield was transformed from death in motion, as in the storming enthusiasts of Langemarck still suffered, into a positional death. In the drumfire of Storm of Steel by Ernst Junger, an accidental surface death arose, a statistical, fatalistic relation of the fighter to the shell that either misses him or turns him into dead matter. That trauma of 1915 to 16 has its invisible and ubiquitous after effects in dynamism, vitalism, and the intoxication of movement of Weimar culture, getting stuck in the mud, the submersion of the attack in the trenches, the shock of immobilization, the fatalistic exposure of shells flying from somewhere or other, the decomposition of bodies in the mud of the trenches. That is the great unsaid, or scarcely said, trauma of the time. But nevertheless it is everywhere at work as practised myth. The myth works on in the protest of the fighters returning from the front against the demobilisation, not to sink into the mud of civilian life. In the cult of aggression, of speed and moving on, which the contemporaries of Weimar prescribed for themselves, in the pleasure taken in the speed of the automobile, which starts off in an elitist fashion with the racing of the famous Mercedes Silver Arrow and mixes in with popular dreams in order to come completely into its own in the program of Volkswagen, the people's car, the power through joy car. In Germany, the motorised nation was initially a fascist dream. The incomprehensibility and the technologised indignity of death in the modern war of artillery burst all categories of conventional meaning. Absurdity elevated itself to the phenomenon par excellence, to the naked and uninterpretable fact that overwhelmed thinking with its brutal, "it is so." The power of this absurdity can also be measured by the omnipresent attempts to overcome the experience of senselessness with left and right-wing anti-absurdist dispositions. A long quote here. This quote from Schalwecker, page 228. They did not call it battle or fight. They said charge, and they spoke of themselves only as we out there. In this way they wandered for months between the hands of death until they could say neither yes nor no to anything, until they did it without a word, a look, without a thought. They could be interchanged arbitrarily in these burning, smelting ovens that stripped off all differences and became like each other, until only the German front soldier remained, who, ossified, took everything upon himself, deed and hunger, exhaustion and dirt, rain and fire, blood, horror and death. Quoting Schalwecker again, this time from page 353. They sacrificed themselves day after day, night after night. Many choked to death in the mud of the shell craters because they did not want to let go of the machine gun. They died in the roar, the smoke, mud and rain. They died in the dugouts, buried and suffocated. They died, gnawed away by gas. They died with gangrene in their wounds. They died everywhere, on the ground, in the air, in dead forests, on hills, in craters. In the end, they fought without hope. They were abandoned, and each stood alone. The only thing they possessed was this. They knew who they were. This existentialism of the fighter at the front is already a belated retrospective bestowal of meaning from the populist perspective, as was depicted in thousands of novels and treatises. This knowing who they were was carried over by the survivors of the war into the Weimar peace, or more precisely, was invented in retrospect in the latter. It is the basic figure in any bestowing of meaning from the right. Absurdity is exchanged for identity. One gains ego feelings through the denial of critical experience. Composure. To the present day, the neoconservatisms have not done anything differently. When the regiment described by Schalwecker withdrew to German soil, it had to, on command from above, destroy all remaining weaponry, shoot it off or sink it in a pond. Albrecht, the hero of the story, experiences this literally as self-castration. Quote from page 369, "Here the nation on command deftly cut off its private parts." In the Bengal light of the last flares, an old war grave lights up before his eyes, a cross nailed together with the inscription. Here a quote from pages 370 to 71. Rifleman Fritz Bredenstahl, Infantry Regiment number 162, 4th Company. He fell on the 26th of August 1914 for his fatherland. He became a little giddy. He suddenly became a bit weak in the knees. A perfect patriotic illumination over the grave of Fritz Bredenstahl, who, according to the inscription in 1914, chose to die for his fatherland and to give himself up to this grave, while the others preferred to explode flares in the air, or to throw away their ammunition, or organise some revolution, or steal what they could get. It was freezing. He became cold. Yes, indeed. What did I want to say? I don't know anymore. It makes me so violently ill. That is all so repugnant to me. Damn it, leave me alone. It's all so horrifyingly stupid and childish. Schalwecker's tortured, sarcastic tone betrays the effort of trying to outdo the objective cynicism of death and war with the subjective cynicism of nausea. His hero returns home with a picture of revolution in his head that would be nothing other than the overcoming of absurdity through grand politics. He dreams of a revolution on the front in which the survivors rise up for the sake of the dead. The Führer of this revolution found motivation for his political mission in a similar way. Hitler lay in the Pasewalk infirmary in Pomerania as the other revolution in Germany began. According to his own account, he was blinded by mustard gas, quote, in the English gas bombardment on the south front at Ypern, end quote, in mid-October. A recent psychological interpretation says, on the contrary, that Hitler's problems with his eyes at this time were a case of hysterical blinding, with which he somatically staged the decision, quote, not to look on, end quote. Be that as it may, Hitler records that on November the 10th, he learned from the infirmary's chaplain the truth about, quote-unquote, out there, i.e., the capitulation in the West and revolution in Berlin. A quote from Mein Kampf here, pages 223 to 225. When things started to go black again, I felt and reeled my way back to the dormitory, threw myself on my bunk and buried my burning head under the blanket and pillow. Since that day when I stood at my mother's grave, I had not wept, but now I could not do otherwise. So, everything had been for nothing. The death of the 2 million who died was in vain. Would not the graves of all those hundreds of thousands have to open? Those who had once set off with a belief in the fatherland? Would they not have to open and send the mute, muddy and bloody heroes home as ghosts of revenge, who had been so shamelessly deceived into making the greatest sacrifice a man can make for his people in this world? Had they died for that? Did these boys of 17 sink into the Flemish earth for this? Had he lain in the hell of the drum fire and in the fever of gas warfare for this? In these nights the hate grew in me, the hate against the culprit behind this deed. In the days following, my destiny also became clear to me. I now had to laugh at the thought of my own future that a short time before had still caused me such bitter worries. Was it not a laughing matter to want to build houses on such ground? There can be no pact with the Jew, but only the hard either-or. But I decided to become a politician. In these pictures, the lived myth of the Weimar Republic speaks. Politics changes into the caring for war graves by the survivors. Those who got out alive seal a pact with the dead. Hitler composes an imaginary testament of the fallen by forcing himself on them as executor. Those who had sunk into the earth and mud stand up within him and return to their people as ghosts of revenge, out of the mud, home to the purity of ideals. Instead of sinking into the Flemish soil, they would storm forward in populist movements. Hitler's conception of the Blitzkrieg that he realised from 1939 onward were a staging of this image of graves that open up in order to transform those who had sunk into them back into stormtroopers. Viewed psychopolitically, the Führer was such a stormtrooper, an emissary of the war graves. The politics of the militaristically and fascistically inspired right rested on the motif of a double, just as Brecht had depicted in his Ballad of the German Soldier. And see also Beumelberg, Voice from the Grave, etc. The pact with the dead is the psychological dynamo of the arch-fascist. At that moment when he makes himself into the executor of those buried in the mud, quote, "But I decided," end quote, his private neurosis discovers the magical contact with the national neurosis. What had previously been only an individual structure, Hitler as emissary and revenger of the dead mother, see the new psychoanalytic interpretation of Hitler by Stierlin and Miller, now becomes politically generalised. Hitler as emissary of the highest order. He is sent, he thinks, by the war dead. They are the millions who stand behind him from the beginning. They cannot save themselves from having such a delegate. In 1930, millions of living stand behind him, the war dead of the future who gave their double vote. Only then did those millions too stand behind him who mustered German industry to support Hitler. See the well-known montage by John Hartfield, quote, "Motto, millions stand behind me," end quote. Hitler raises his hand for the German salute. A corpulent donor, larger than life, lays a bundle of 1,000-mark notes in his hand. Hartfield calls the montage, quote, "the meaning of Hitler's salute," end quote. In his poem Stimmen aus dem Massengrab, Voices from the Mass Grave, 1928, Erich Kästner formulated another testament to these dead millions. We have dirt in our mouths. We have to be silent and want to scream until the graves break open, and want to climb out of the grave screaming. We have dirt in our mouths. You cannot hear us. There we lie, our dead mouths full of dirt. And things went differently than we thought as we were dying. We died, but we died without purpose. You will let yourselves be slaughtered tomorrow, like we did yesterday.